Hey, everybody, we're uncharacteristically late starting because I didn't have my arthritis pills. It's true. How you doing?
Good.
It's true.
What do you do?
What do you do? What do you do?
We're all busy. We're all busy.
6 O's around the corner, I think. I'm going to crawl. I'm crawling there.
As long as you make it.
I will make it by hook or by crook, I promise you. Yeah, so I got the ultimate stimulant right here. When all else fails, there's black coffee.
There you go.
Mike, what the hell happened in that court? Let's recap. March 20th of last year, you tried to you went to a court operated by a guy not named Garrett Long.
Yeah, there's I think there's a lot to be said for where everyone is in the process right now with COVID and all the other delays. I think giving people time to straighten stuff out, and we've talked about this before about how people haven't really taken advantage of that time.
Right.
But one of the things that it did do was it essentially gave cover to folks who would have been essentially delayed because of this question anyways, on what rules are going to apply to this draft EIR and CEQA process for Howard Terminal. That's a fundamental question. And, obviously, we're still in the process of reviewing the decision that came out yesterday and deciding what our next steps, if any, are going to be. So I can't speak to that, but I can speak to obviously what happened and what was in the order and what we did when we filed last year. Appreciate you having me on to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, folks, as you know, we roll. This is his platform. And so, but I think it's really important, really important to get out of the way what's going on here. And what's going on here is that once again, we have a big project that filed for what's called a streamlined environmental review process. It's been done a number of times. It was done in the case of the Warriors. In the case of the Warriors, I was actually at that hearing. Garrett Wong was the judge. And I was on the side trying to argue that they shouldn't have a fast track. And Mike, I swear, as much as I personally love Garrett, I swear he fell asleep. No, I'm not kidding. He actually fell asleep. I'm at the back of the room and my mouth is hitting the floor. And I'm did the judge fall asleep?
You got to blame the litigators then. Don't be boring. Don't put the judge to sleep.
Yeah, well, hey, and on top of that, I was trying to check and see if he had any Warrior season tickets, and we know how it came out. So we all try to keep the Warriors in Oakland.
Yeah, I think if you look at the ruling that came out yesterday for us, the things that stick out obviously are when a panel of judges uses the word, or the phrase "from a practical point of view," then they're not giving you a strictly legal opinion. When they have to couch these things to say,
what does that mean? A practical point of view?
Well, I mean, typically that would mean that you're making a decision based on facts, but this is just purely a case of interpretation of law, I think they said pretty plainly in there several different times, both of the arguments here are reasonable, and they were trying to come to a, if you don't mind the colloquialism, a decision where the tie goes to the runner. I think what's pretty fair is there's a theme And the theme was, we don't want to get in the way of this project if people think the project's really important. And that seems to be the same type of ruling that people would get in those other types of projects like you were referring to as well.
That's why I said Garrett fell asleep. That's why.
Yeah. And I don't think that's entirely unreasonable. If you're the legislature and you specifically say we want to provide special accommodations for these types of projects because, but our lawsuit was very specific. It says, if you want to have the privilege of having these special rules apply to you, you have to meet the procedures and the timelines that were laid out in the statute for you to get that certification. And in our case, we argued that they missed the deadline and therefore they don't get the certification. What the panel really came back yesterday and said was, well, they couldn't meet the criteria in time because they couldn't convince the Air Resources Board that their project was actually GHG neutral in time. The legislature should have known that what they were asking the A's to do was complicated and hard. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the deadline doesn't apply. I mean, that's pretty backwards. You'd have to come to the conclusion that the court did, that somehow what the A's and the city and the state really wanted was more time to complete their EIR.
Right.
But obviously the opposite's true. Not only did they not want more time, they were clearly trying to accelerate the pace of their project. So they didn't go into the legislature saying, legislature, I need more time. My project's really complex. It's going to take forever. Like, how am I going to get this done in time? It's the opposite. They came in and they said, we really need to speed up this process.
I got the impression that there are some people in the city, I'll just say, they're operating as if we don't have a lot of staff, so we need to get this out of the way as fast as possible. And I say that from the perspective, it's hindsight, because of all the gaps in this project that exists to this day.
Maybe I don't have a lot of transparency into that. I mean, I think that's possible. I do know that, when they put out the NOP, the notice of preparation for the project, that was in November or December of 2018. Mm-hmm. They said they were going to have that final EIR, the final EIR done, and to council by fall of 2019. Mm-hmm. There's not an EIR for a project this big in a city that does have a full complement of staff that can move a project EIR that fast.
Right. And
I don't know.
And around that time, I remember having a conversation with Steve Lowe that continued into the next year, not continuous, obviously, but who's the project manager? No one could tell me. And then apparently they were in the middle of hiring the person that became Molly Mabern. Not to imply that, she was conjured up out of thin air, but I'm saying that Molly just came on in 2019 as a project manager. So somewhere in there is
right.
It's
pretty curious. I mean, if you're under the impression, so going back to this ruling from yesterday, if you're under the impression that you need until 20, because that was one of the things that were cited, I'm going to need until 2024 to clear my EIR through the lead agency. But in 2019, you'll remember that Dave and the A's were talking about hosting a World Series in 2023 in the new stadium.
I remember that.
Right. So,
I remember that.
So the timelines don't mesh. And I think if there's any credit to be given, it should be given to the attorneys from the state AG's office. They did a really good job of arguing a point. I think it's a legal supposition that isn't backed up by facts, but we weren't in a factual part of a trial. We were just making decisions as a matter of law. Mm-hmm. And their argument was, do you think it's practical that this could get done in a year if it took over a year for ARB just to come back with their part of the certification? And the judges seemed to be swayed by that and said, no, that doesn't seem practical to me. And obviously, you know, in the bigger context, if you were telling people that your final EIR was going to be done within a year from your NOP, and that was before the end of 2019, you wouldn't have had any trouble meeting
Right.
criteria if that was your intended timeline. And we know that that was their intended timeline because that's what they told everyone. That's what the city told people. I remember several of the planning commissioners, that very first planning commission hearing in December of 2018, saying, wow, that seems really aggressive. And essentially what the city staff said at the time was, well, that's the A's timeline. And we know that that's what they wanted because that's what they were pushing for with the certification at the time. But it goes back to another thing that you and I have talked about before too, Zenny, which is the A's do seem to have the ability to dictate what this calendar looks like. And yeah, that's right. There doesn't seem to be a lot of independent, objective pushback from the city. Just to say, here's what really needs to happen. And then when it does, like when Betsy laid out for them, Betsy Lake in her letter in March of this year, basically rolled out the red carpet and said, this is exactly how you need to get your project through. This is how we're going to do it. And here's our timeline. They still said, no, we need to accelerate it. But it's a pattern. You know, AB 734, the issue that was up for decision yesterday was, well, you don't like the state's EIR process. I think it takes a long time. Change the rules. That was AB 734. And then they said, well, you don't like the BCDC and state lands process and their protocols for making decisions. Well, change the rules. That was AB 1191. There you go. And you don't like to have to go through all the enhanced infrastructure financing district hoops that already exist, and you don't want to have to deal with a vote, then change the rules, SB 293. Oh yeah, and then most recently, you don't like the law on affordable housing, you don't like the current ordinance that's on place. Well, Dave just says, I don't have to follow the rules. I mean, there's a theme.
You know why I'm laughing though, Mike? Is because it's getting to the point where they're forgetting which rules they want to change. And so Dave goes around and says, wait a minute, I don't want to use that one. I want to use the
Oh man.
I mean,
it's a big project. It's a complicated project, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to the legislature, going to the city, and saying, "I'd like to talk to you about doing it this way," or "Here's an idea we have for how we're going to do this better." And I don't begrudge anyone their ability to do that.
Oh no, I reward it, and I mean to interrupt you. It's just if you're going to do that, and this is my thing with SB 293 Skinner, as you know, at least stick to it, and then don't make an appearance before the county of Alameda and say, we're not going to use that. And then suddenly you got Dave Cavall saying, well, we are going to use it publicly. And it looks like Keystone Cops. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
You know,
right. That's where we're at. You wrote these bills, your lawyers wrote the bills, and then you don't follow through and actually execute them.
Right.
That's just mind-blowing to me. I don't know why that's happening. I don't know if that's just too many, cooks in the kitchen, or too many competing priorities, or their plans aren't solidified, or there's a bit of incompetence, or just hubris or ego. I don't know what it is.
How about all the above?
Maybe.
Hey, I have a question for you on that. This is something I've never asked, and I've always assumed this was the case. If I have a law out there, like SB 293 Skinner, or any of these laws that have been created, can I repurpose them? In other words, can I refer to them because they've been passed, even though not employed? Can I refer to them as the basis for another project?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the terms, right? So the 734 is very specific only to Howard Terminal, just by its own definitions. But 293 is not. I mean, that's very wide open. I think this is a conversation that you've had several times with the city about setting up the administrative capability for executing that statute. That's something
Right.
we should be doing whether this project moves forward or not, because that language is so wide open. They could use that for all types of different things that no other city in the state has the authority to do.
Would you guys do that? I mean, since you all are already involved in this, if the A's decide to take off for Las Vegas and it's just sitting there?
I think it would be a great thing for the city to do. It's similar in scope and scale to what you had under redevelopment, minus obviously all the other components of the tax increment that you used to obviously automatically have access to from the schools and the county and special districts. But why not? No other city in the state has what the city of Oakland has right now because of 293.
Where are we now? I mean, let's take stock of where we're at. This is August 11th. We just had this happen. We've got the county next, right?
Definitely the county is going to be, I think, the next public spot for something to happen. We don't know, and maybe this is something that you'll hear about before I do, but we don't know what has been delivered to the county from the city. So as you may recall from that marathon meeting that the Board of Supervisors had, they basically asked the city to give to their staff all the information that they would need to analyze a proposal after the city council meeting of July 20th. So it's been 3 weeks. Ostensibly, something's been transmitted from the city to the county for the county to do some evaluations and look into that. But I don't know what it is, or we don't know if it has, if that's happened yet, or what the city actually expects the county to look at. I think it that's an important question.
I think I can shed some light. I think I can shed some light on that. If I'm the county, what I'm looking for is a precise definition of how much land is going to be used and what the assessed value will be that I'm expected to essentially give up. And then what that impact is going to be on me as a county. And from there, if I'm the county, I'm asking for a deal. Let's say that I'm in charge of both sides. All right, I'll just do that challenge. Let's say that I'm saying, okay, all right, Zen, you claim that this can produce 1.6 billion in tax increment. Now I'm less concerned about the shape of the district. You have that worked out because that gives us our assessed value. We've got our lines, we've got our coordinates. Okay, fine. But I know it's 55 acres, but I've got these facilities, these waste facilities I want to finance. And I feel like if you're going to add a population down there, you need to help me do that better. So how about 50 million? That's the way I'm playing it. Now, having said all that, I'll bet your credits to Navy Beans, they're not playing it that way, and that's the problem.
The city or the county or both?
I don't think the county's looking. I don't think the county. A couple of people plus have told me they're not familiar with this stuff anymore, so they don't know to think about it that way. My problem is I see the forest. I see the trees before the forest because I've been there for so many years. I'm explaining what they should be thinking about, but what they're going to get tied up in are district and boundary shapes. And then beyond that, they're going to get tied up in impacts. They're going to get tied up in your area. Okay. And what's going to happen, this is my fear, but it's a reality. I believe what's going to happen is that they are going to get to a point, given the A's behavior, throwing that baby. There's a danger they could throw the baby out with the bathwater, rather than doing what they would do under Steve Zaley, which is they would engineer a way for both to be together. Now, I hope I'm wrong, but I'm just calling it as it looks. I'm just calling balls and strikes as they look to me. They're forecasted, of course, but I don't see them making a sound economic decision, which in a government context involves politics. I see them making an entirely political decision because they don't understand the techniques behind the numbers like institutionally we used to. Yeah.
Well, that's possible, or it could also be that they're reacting to whatever the city pitches them. And I think that's the big question mark for me is, who knows what package was delivered to them after the city council vote? Who knows what numbers they're actually asking for, how they're justifying it. I don't know.
Given that they're on vacation, I used to think otherwise, but look, color me jaundiced. I'm not convinced that that's happening because there's not this. There's a small number of people. There's consultants, and the athletics are divided, and they're basically been,
Yeah.
pulling the strings, as I say, right? But some of those strings are now in Las Vegas, and so it's division. I'll be surprised if, given what I've seen to this point, I'll be shocked if they got further. I'll do some checking, but so many people have been on vacation that just sends up a red flag to me.
Yeah, I guess the real question is, that Dave and the A's were trying to establish the end of the baseball season as a new timeline for having clarity and having a binding decision. And we all know that that's another made up negotiating deadline. That's not a real deadline. It's completely arbitrary. It has nothing to do with anything. And they know what the schedule is because they've had that letter from Betsy Lake since March. Yep. And they know they're behind. And if what you're surmising is correct, that there doesn't seem to be a lot of urgency behind the communications from the city to the county, they're not going to have that done in early September if they have it done in September at all. So that's tough.
Like, just wait until Brad Sherrock comes out with his design
in Vegas.
Right. That is going to have some kind of impact. It's going to send the signal that, hey, they've been working, they're out of here, and therefore it might even push the county to say no. That's dangerous to me. And the A's, here's the danger for the A's and Dave, and I hope Dave is watching. Our economy is going to do this again, because of this virus is kicking up. This thing could be spaceborne and we wouldn't know it because no one ever told us, really. It's a scary time. And I hate to sound that way. I'm saying the first thing that comes out of my mouth. I'm not censoring myself. I'm just saying what I'm putting together, the whole of what I've seen, and I'm just letting it just spew out because of the total frustration with how this has gone. Like, you guys should have been a part of the plan. All the stuff that I've said before. It's like a cake, right?
Yeah.
So I hope I'm wrong. I'm
assuming.
wrong.
Yeah, I'm assuming that they're still pursuing Howard. I'm assuming that they're still moving forward with something. I take the public comments by folks at face value that they still are negotiating, because I don't think it's in my best interest to do anything other than to assume that. But I think at the same time,
couldn't you come up with your own plan and say, hey, look, we've been waiting on you guys, but this is the very plan?
Well, actually, we are working on that with the port. We still are talking about what does actual seaport compatibility look like? And again, that was one of the reasons why we were relatively happy with that city council meeting on July 20th, because all the council members said, not only do you have to get us a community benefits agreement, not only do you have to get us a development agreement, but you've got to work out the seaport compatibility measure issue. And that doesn't happen. I mean, it's still a project with a sponsor. I mean, that doesn't happen unless the A's commit to sit down at the table and work something out, which they haven't done.
Oh, hey, I don't know. I'm going to assume that you haven't, but maybe you're ahead of me. Have you checked out the infrastructure bill now this passed the Senate? It's headed for the House?
No. No, but I do love the fact that people assume that there's magic money in there for the A's that's going to, somehow save them.
There's magic money in it for seaport rise or sea level rise. And for the waterfront issues, I'm thinking that
there definitely is port money in there.
Right.
And I can imagine that people believe that that's going to be easy to access. And our history with those funds is they're exceptionally competitive. And by the time that you get through the ABC process, which is short for anywhere but California, it just isn't a lot of federal money to go around. And then once you're looking at it, we compete as hard against each other in the state as we do nationally for that money. Boy, it'd be hard to imagine how you get a lot of money out of that. I mean, even though the infrastructure bill is huge, right?
Yeah.
Once you start breaking it down amongst all the states and everyone else that's looking for this cash, there's just not usually a lot of oomph. And what that means for individual projects, unless you've been earmarked. And you know how the earmarking process isn't what it used to be.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
John Marks has a question here. John Marks he says, do you think a deal can be reached by 2024? It's like an open-ended one. So take that as you wish. Mike.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that's a really good question for the A's. Like, do they actually want a deal? They haven't sat down like they do. I think that the fake posturing, the deadlines that are completely arbitrary to get set up, you can take as one of two ways. You can either take it as someone who's a little bit more cynical might take it as, this is posture for them to shut themselves down and potentially open up this alternative lane for Las Vegas. Or it's just if you're more constructive and positive about it, you could just say, well, this is just how they're intending to create some more leverage for this deal, but they intend to stay. But that's the deal parameters. From a legal perspective, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that if you just take out this timeline, even if you assume they have the 734 streamlining, right? If you think that there's going to be a final EIR and development agreement by Q1 next year, and then you assume that there's going to be some sort of litigation, you're not going to have a certified project until 2023 at the earliest.
Right.
Then you still have all the discretionary approvals that still have to come after that. With BCDC and permitting and State Lands Commission and the Department of Toxic Substances Control. So I think the 2024 timeline is probably right.
Mm-hmm.
If the A's actually want to have a fully entitled project, you're probably looking at sometime before 2024 before anyone gets to turn a shovel, if everything goes according to their plan.
Congratulations, John. You win the 2024 prize.
And then, obviously we'll be trying to leverage as much out of the process as we can, because that's our job. Protect our interests by making sure that whatever our operations are impacted, that those are mitigated to the full extent of what we can get. And, But we're just back to where we were talking about before, and we've talked about this on previous discussions we've had. If the A's don't want to come to the table with the level of pressure we've put on, then I only have one option. It's to try to create leverage somewhere by creating more pressure. Because we have everything that we need, I think, from a policy perspective, because the Board of Port Commissioners in 2019, when they entered their non-binding term sheet, they put out the parameters for the seaport compatibility measures.
Yep.
And we have a commitment from the mayor that she doesn't want to have a project that moves forward that doesn't protect the working waterfront. And now we have the council saying all the same thing. The only party that's at the table saying, I don't want to do it, and when I raise those questions, has pretty personally shot me down, but also called out everyone in the maritime industry basically as fearmongers, is the A's.
Dave. Yeah, Dave did do that. Yeah.
So
it wasn't his finest. It wasn't his finest high IQ political moment. Sorry, Dave. I'm sorry.
I have a lot of respect for Dave, but I
love Dave. Okay, I love Dave, but
I think
it doesn't mean I'm gonna sit back and love everything he does. I mean, I thought it was not a smart thing to do.
It's not a good look, but I think also what it does is it exposes the fact that they don't want to deal.
Yeah.
And so they either don't want to deal because they don't want to solve the problems, or because they think they can steamroll over the problems. And they've, neither of those things are good for Oakland. Neither of those things are good for getting a project. Neither of those things are done for getting a project done quickly. Neither of those things are good for getting a project done without going to court. Neither of those things are good for making a project that ultimately works the best for everyone in Oakland from terms of congestion and emissions and, the things that the community cares about. So, I think this is just a really simple conversation to have. When you want to move into someone else's neighborhood, if you do it and you show up and you start swinging elbows and telling people you're going to take them down, which is essentially what they've done, because every time we said, this looks really bad, your project might impact us. And then they pat us on the head and say, no, everything's going to be fine. And then they turn around and they sue people to shut them down, which they've done twice. Actions speak louder than words. So we just don't have any committed action from the A's. And until they show up in good faith, I don't know why people would think that there's going to be a deal. And they're the folks that are putting the money on the table.
Yeah. Plus, from their point of view, they're thinking, "Gee, we won in court twice, so we're King Kong. Yeah, we rule." And for what that's worth, I don't know.
Maybe.
Because there's still the specter of them leaving for Vegas, which gets me to this question, which would seem not to be related, but it is. We're not going to have we're not going to have the same mayor come a year and a half. So are you all lining up your political chips behind the scenes and saying, hey, who do we get behind? Is there anybody that's emerged? I don't see anybody yet.
No, not yet. I think it's way too early. I think one of the benefits of the timing, frankly, is that most of the debate and fire and brimstone and negotiations and threats and all that stuff, that should all be done by November of 2021. So if you're running for mayor by this time next year, that development agreement should already either be done or close to done. And EIR should either be figured out or it should be in court. And I think it could be a blessing in disguise. The worst case scenario for the next potential mayor is this isn't wrapped up.
Right.
It's not Libby's project, and all of a sudden it's theirs.
Right. And that's why I kind of feel like that's happening in a sense. slowly. We've got a ways to go, but I feel like we're at the cusp where that's beginning to start, precipitated by the possibility the athletics are going to leave. It's hard to focus with certainty if the person that you're negotiating with has one eye over here and the other eye over there, and you're not quite certain exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah.
In the future. That's why I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like everybody's almost lining up to see what the other person's going to do. And in Oakland, and there's not a council member, there's not the mayor, there's not anybody who's really pushing it forward. Like, for example, rather than announce you're going to go on vacation, why not go on vacation?
I mean, God bless city staff. Every single one of those meetings where they were on vacation and the A's said, I want this, I want that. They showed up from their hotel room on those meeting calls.
In Hawaii.
Sure.
In Hawaii.
That's dedication.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think if you're the president of any major organization, you really don't ever have a real vacation. But if you're the president of a baseball team, if you're the one who's pushing a specific date in public and you're the one who's telling everyone that you need action, change your plans.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't get it.
I don't think, you know what though? I don't think Dave was really on vacation. I think Dave was working on that other stadium, the ballpark in Vegas, because he went on the longest drought of social media I've ever seen in my life for him, and he's still on it. So, I just look at it this way: when all else fails, you look at what people do, and
yeah. Well, I think, maybe the other assumption from that is that if you're not hearing from them and all's quiet, then, the thing to presume is that they are trying to work on something, and there's nothing publicly to talk about. And
I know Betsy.
That wouldn't be a style, but
Betsy's on vacation. I know that. Betsy's on vacation because I know that because some other colleagues, some friends of mine that work on another project, she was supposed to be in a meeting with them last week and she wasn't there. So I know she's on vacation. But I don't know what the A's are up to.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, they're playing pretty good on the field.
Hey, playoffs, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Doing good.
I just feel like we need to have some alternative plans. I'm not the mayor. I'm not in charge. I'm not going to run for mayor. This time is just not right. And then I probably wouldn't get elected anyway. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's not my thing.
Yeah.
But me aside, there's no leadership, man.
It's tough. You've been around in Oakland long enough to know that when these big projects come through, they really need someone to be their champion, right?
Yeah.
And obviously that's been the mayor, and she's done a lot of hard work for the A's.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we've talked about before too, leading up to this vote on the 20th, where all these fans were sandbagging the city and the council and the mayor. I'm like, boy, you guys don't even know what the hell you're talking about. Like, no city administration has pushed a project along more than this administration has with this mayor. But you're right. Who is that person? Who's that voice on the council? There obviously isn't somebody.
No. And what I mean by leadership, and I say this pointedly, all right? It's, what the hell? She's already mad at me. I'll just say it. There should have been task force. You should have been on it. Robert, everybody that she knows that has been involved in sports in some way, she should have done like what she did when she got elected. She called me and said, I need to talk to you about Mark Davis and how to work with him. We had that conversation in November of 2014. You know, she should have had her cabinet. But instead of what she did, which is, I'm just going to talk to my people that work directly for me. Well, it doesn't really work great. And what bothers me is there's a lot of ways to clean that up, because the problem as an elected official today is just the nature of the game. You are in many different areas at what your head is spinning this way, this way. You can't possibly understand all there is to do about this project. You just can't.
You shouldn't.
Right. So you find it Ezra, if you will, Ezra who constructed the Raiders deal and a number of other deals, and did some secret projects that pissed off the EB Mud property manager way back when I was the intern. But you need that kind of person, you know, and I don't care who it is. You need somebody that's experienced in doing it. And you need them to work with the community outside, not just by themselves inside City Hall, if you will, either euphemistically or actually. And what the problem, Mike, is that Libby is a great promoter and some people like to use the term cheerleader. I don't like to use it because sometimes I think it's used derisively against her. I think it's a wrong thing. But it would have allowed her to play that role rather than worry about the details, because she had somebody back there who was the point. Who would say, hey, look, you deal with the media. You do it, right?
Right.
And instead, she's like trying to be Atlas like this. And
I think that's for sure. She has carried the weight of this project on her shoulders.
Yeah.
That's why I just go back to, I look at what the A's are doing versus all the ways the city is bending over backwards for them. And I would not place the blame for a deal not coming together on the shoulders of the city. I would blame the A's. Yeah. Again, I mean, obviously I'm biased, and if the project doesn't go forward at all, I'd be more than happy. But if it does, it needs to go forward well, and there needs to be somebody who polices that. So
we need to call it. We need to set a date, and we need to start pushing this train. If they're going to move to Vegas, they need to give us excuse my language, a fucking answer what they're going to do by X date. And if they don't do it, we're going to move ahead. And if they don't move ahead the way we want, we will replace them.
Well, I think you're back to that July 20th meeting. And if you ask city council members, they called the question on the A's when they said, I need an answer by the summer on, whether or not you share my vision or not. And they all knew that was in response to that letter from Betsy Lake in March.
Yeah. But see, here's the difference, though, Mike, is that this goes back to the Raiders. We made the same mistake. We didn't call them. We didn't act like we're afraid to act like the Godfather. We're afraid in this generation, I think that's the best way to put it, to call the shots. So what happens, disagree with me if I'm wrong, please, but the A's call the shots for us. They claim, hey, it's our dime, we're paying it. Well, there's some influence laws that I think I can run up against, but and then the city does nothing to push back. So Libby gives a dual site ENA. This is a dual site ENA. It's how we got into this mess, right?
Yeah.
You either pick Howard Terminal or the Coliseum. They said, "Oh, we'll take both." Both, right? And right then, Libby should have said, "No. That's not what I want you to do. You pick one or the other." She didn't do that. She let them have both.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you've got to choose.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing is, now that we're in that spot and we let them say yes to both, then I think that's what leaves open this door. And obviously I'm going to keep pushing that door back open to the extent that we can. And you and I can disagree on it. Other people can disagree on it too. But if you're a half owner of the Coliseum or a future half owner, depending on whether or not they actually pay their deposits and all that stuff. I have no idea where that is.
They have a long-term deal. I'll find out.
Yeah, they've got they still have a foot in the door there, so I still wouldn't rule out East Oakland. I mean, obviously, it's not where they want to go, but I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, if you are back to this, where we started this conversation today, right? If you want to go fast, you go to the Coliseum.
Right. If you want to go slow, to the Howard Terminal. Yeah. Yeah. And then when you go to Howard Terminal, because the infrastructure bill allows this now, we can now really think seriously about fixing the sea level rise problem.
Absolutely.
Whereas before we couldn't,
I think that's exactly right, because I think sea level problem at the Coliseum location is real, but I think it's also solvable.
Yeah. Oh, definitely solvable. My issue has always been, hey, look, we don't have a plan. It's just, get a plan. But now we can get a plan going. And
no, if anyone thinks that the city of Oakland is going to surrender 150 acres there to sea level rise, something's wrong. And it's hardscaped by Caltrans all on one side, and then they already have a channelized environment on the other. If you're going to defend any part of urban Oakland from sea level rise, that's it. So
it's been about an hour, so let's take us out.
Thanks, Eddie.
You got
appreciate the time.
Hey, what's your next move?
Man, all these other people are taking vacation. I should too.
You deserve one, my friend.
We're going to keep working and plugging away on seaport compatibility measures with the port. We'll probably actually put out a compendium or summary of everything we're working on, so people have some transparency into that process, because it's been pretty opaque so far. Because we did have people ask, like, what are you guys asking for? And frankly, we're trying to be as holistic as possible, and include things that were in the draft EIR and a whole lot of business related issues that aren't in the EIR. And infrastructure. So that includes, big picture items like how are we going to pay for our, grade separations that everyone's been talking about, additional truck lanes and truck designated lanes off the freeway that are separated and segregated from stadium traffic. How do we ensure that we're doing the expansion of our turning basin responsibly and doing it in a way which integrates with what the A's are doing. So when they're doing planning, they're doing our planning for us, as opposed to planning for something that we have to undo. So the turning basin expansion isn't an afterthought, like it is right now in the A's plans. Mm-hmm. We want that to be just really quickly, we want that to be the win-win proposition moving forward that they talk about. So when they show a picture of Howard Terminal, we want them to show the Howard Terminal that is compatible with the turning basin expansion. But when you see a picture in the newspaper, that ain't the one you see. Yeah. When you see the presentation at City Council, that ain't the one you see. When they talk to us about how they've made all these concessions and then they flip up a picture and it doesn't include the expanding turning basin, that's not a win-win for us. It's just, there's some things about this that are just so simple that if they wanted to have a win-win situation, they could be doing. Yeah. And there's other things like that too. Like we're looking for indemnity from the A's with respect to impacts on our business. If you've already made an agreement with the port that you're going to honor with respect to seaport compatibility, then you should have some skin in the game. And maybe it isn't, obviously we would love to have open-ended indemnity, but that's probably not likely to occur. But at least you could have some liquidated damages, or you could have some funds that are established to take care of those types of things. And we just haven't seen that. And there's just no movement on it. And all that just comes back to a really basic proposition. And I think that it's one that when people sit down and think about it, they'll say, oh yeah, that makes sense. And it's that there is literally no upside to this project for the port industry. No one has once said, here are all the great things about this project. And by the way, here's how it benefits you. There is no upside. So the only thing we can do is mitigate the risks of a downside. All we can try to do is hold ourselves whole, right? We know we're never going to be better off if this happens. So that's the spot we're in. You know, it's like we're fighting just for someone to say, oh, no, here's what we're going to do to ensure that you're made whole. And here's what we're going to do to ensure that we truly have compatibility with what you do. And then we're back to the same proposition. As long as the A's are not participating in that conversation, then we know it isn't going to be funded. If the A's aren't coming to the table to negotiate something, we know it's not going to be negotiated. And if it's left up to a future point in time, I'll use the turning basin as an expansion as an example. It's not going to be in the A's interest to work to help us expand the turning basin if it comes at the price of them losing 15 acres of Howard Terminal off of their entitlement, right? So even if the plan's in place to do it, even if they agreed to a framework for how it happens if it happens, there's nothing that would stop them from turning around after they get an entitlement, going to Congress and say, hey, whatever you do, don't include the money in the WRDA authorization appropriation bill for turning basin expansion in Oakland. Then we're screwed. So, you know, that is not what we're looking for. We're not just looking for the opportunity to have a potential for a plan, which is what we've got now. We want something where the baseline consideration for the A's in Oakland is, how do I invest in making my project work for us and for our port neighbors? We haven't done that yet.
Mike, we'll be back.
Thank you.
Stick around in the back room.
Will do.
Stick around, right? Hey, folks, we'll be back. Subscribe to Zenny62. Bookmark OaklandNewsNow.com.